Welcome to Backstory with Joan Goldstein. I'm Joan Goldstein. I have a wonderful guest here today. He's come all the way from London, England to be on my show. And he was on my show almost exactly a year ago to talk about a book that he wrote. And we're going to talk about it today, and we're going to talk about what happened afterwards. What's happened in the past year to a book that he and David Herzl call When Your Life Depends on It. And you want to tell us what it's about?
Sure. It's great to be here, Joan.
I didn't say your name, Brad Borkin. Sorry. Okay,
That's
Brad.
Sure. It's great to be here. And the book is about the life and death decisions that the early Antarctic explorers made on the ice. And then what we can learn from these decisions to help us make better decisions in our modern lives. So it really goes through these incredible stories of survival against all the elements and the risks of early Antarctic expeditions and exploration to get to the South Pole.
And you learned several things very, very important about decision making, about leadership. Aren't we so much concerned all over the world about leadership? And what were some of the things that you learned?
Well, there are many things. It's about leadership and teamwork and resilience and about being purpose-driven. I think one of the reasons these expeditions, and there are 6 major expeditions in the early 1900s, they didn't descend into anarchy and mayhem and sabotage and murder. And there were many expeditions that went to the Arctic, some that went to the Antarctic, in other nationalities where they did descend into disruption. And here you had 6 expeditions that basically for the most part, achieved tremendous results against the greatest adversity, and they did so in a great team in a great spirit of working together. And they did that because of the leadership. They did that because they had a real sense of purpose about getting to the South Pole, about getting to whatever their destination was, mapping and doing scientific studies. And it was just a sense of camaraderie that wove through these expeditions.
And they became heroes, and they became heroes to all of us. I think I said this at the show last year. I remembered as a little girl in school, in elementary school, that one day they brought a speaker to the kids in the auditorium, and he was the Richard E. Byrd.
Yes.
And he was the explorer who went to the South Pole, correct?
Well, he was one of the early Antarctic explorers.
Yes.
Not past the era that I talk about. My era is up to 1917, and he was later than that.
He was later than that, and there he showed up on the stage in the auditorium, and his face was all red. And I thought, he must have a red face because of all the snow and wind. That was my translation of Richard E. Byrd.
Yeah.
But he was a hero coming around to the little schools and to the children, and yes. And what was it we needed? What was it we needed to have that they gave us?
Well, this is the remarkable thing, because also these explorers also did many talks after their expeditions, where they're fundraising for going to societies and going to various churches and various fundraising events, but also the schools and talking about the challenges. I mean, there are these wonderful stories of teamwork, and basically, for the most part, Antarctic travel required pulling everything that you had along with you, whether you were being assisted by dogs or ponies, or in some cases motor sledges, but the motor sledges never worked very well. But the fact that, in the most part, they had to end up pulling their sledges along by what's called manhauling, and that's the picture on the cover of the book. Mm-hmm. And it's exceedingly difficult and exceedingly hard work, and the distances are vast. Mm-hmm. So to get from the coast to the South Pole is about 800 or 850 miles, and every single step is heartbreakingly difficult.
And didn't you say something about you could only see as far as you could shout?
You could only, the only communication was as far as you could shout.
You could shout, yeah. You have that in the book.
There's no, they had no means of calling for help. They couldn't even call for help to each other in certain circumstances, because the winds in Antarctica are so strong. And so even if you're shouting 50 feet away, someone may not hear you. To someone 50 feet away, someone may not hear you. Mm-hmm. And I think that's so the stories are just phenomenal in the sense that they're just these wonderful stories of of human nature, just trying to survive and thrive in environments where you're also at times starving to death, suffering from scurvy, suffering from snow blindness, suffering from frost. And the list of challenges goes on and on. And you can fall into crevasses, and in some cases they did. And
that was a
sometimes they
scary
survive,
story.
and sometimes they don't survive.
Yeah,
And there's
right.
there's numerous times
Yeah.
when they come very near death, but actually don't actually die.
They don't actually die. But then there was one group that couldn't go any further, and they just accepted the fact that they were going to die. And was it Shackleton's?
That was Scott.
Scott.
So Captain Scott
Captain
and his
Scott.
team. And but what was remarkable about Scott, and I think this is one of the great stories that come out of this, is like from Captain Scott's expeditions, which are very scientific expeditions, some of that science that they were doing 100 years ago is becoming the baseline for climate change today.
Oh, my.
And there's a very poignant story of that we talk about towards the end of the book, which is they know they're dying. So they know they're running out of food, they're running out of energy, they've got frostbite, they've got very vast distances to go, and there's no one coming to rescue them. There's, as we said, no communication except as far as you can shout. And they knew death was imminent. And and a few days before they had stopped to recover some rocks and fossils. They saw some rocks and fossils that one of the men was a keen scientist, went to carry these, and they knew they were dying, and they carried, it was 32 pounds in weight, that they put onto the sledge, and they're pointing along knowing that they weren't going to make it. And they didn't jettison, when you think the normal human thing would be jettison everything you don't need from your sledge, make it as light as possible to go as far as you can, because there was a depot that they knew was about 11 miles away, and they never did. And those rocks and fossils, what those fossils were, and what was remarkable, is those fossils were a fern, and the fern they knew was the same fern that was found in parts of Australia, and parts of southern Africa, and parts of South America, and India, and it proved that the continents were once joined up. I know the continents look like they all would fit like a puzzle piece, but the only way of proving that they were all connected was a seed pod, a leaf fossil, that where the seeds of that leaf were too heavy to be carried by the wind. They had to be carried because through animals or through other forms of nature. And so the fact that they knew what they had and they were not going to let it go, even in the face of death. And these stories are just remarkable.
They are remarkable. And you know, we taped the show about a year ago, and then you had adventures after that, didn't you, from the book?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. What happened after that, after we taped the shows?
Right. So I came on the show at the very start because I gave a talk at the Princeton Senior Research Center, and you came to my talk, and you came up to me afterwards and said, "Oh, you could be on my show," and that was sort of the start of getting to know you. So this is the third time I'm on your show, and each time the book has progressed in and accelerated, and Princeton Community TV and you, Joan, gave me the strength and courage and belief in the book to actually think this book can actually go quite far, and I always had in my heart the idea of doing an audiobook, of creating an audiobook from the book. So I sat down with a microphone. I thought, how hard is this to create an audiobook? I'll just read the book into a microphone, and I read a half a page, and I listened to myself back. I thought, no. This is not going to work. And I thought, what would these men sound like? You look at there are a few recordings of Shackleton and things, but they're scratchy old phonograph things. You really can't get a sense of their voices. What would they sound like? I thought, I'm going to find myself a voice actor who could have the right resonant tonality, the deep, rugged, masculine voice that would be needed for sound like what these Antarctic explorers would be. And I through listening to hundreds of voices on the internet, I found Dennis Kleiman, who was South African and but lives in America, and he recorded the audiobook. And when he finished, he said, we should put this up for an award.
Oh, one step in front of the other.
One step in front of the other, and we did, and we ended up in Hollywood.
Oh.
And we end up in, so just like there's the Oscars and the Grammys, there's something called Voice Arts Awards. And Voice Arts are for voice actors, for TV documentaries, voiceover of commercials, voiceover of movie trailers, wherever we hear voiceovers. And voiceovers, basically audiobooks in different categories. And so we submitted in the history category and ended up as finalists. And at an event with Sigourney Weaver. And it was just an absolutely remarkable journey.
Yes,
And
your journey, and your journey is continuing.
And it's continued.
It's continuing. So we start off with our TV show, and then you go on from there. And these shows are being watched in England, and they're on your website, correct? And where else are they being watched?
So the book has sold in China, in Bolivia, in various, many of the European countries, in Australia, New Zealand. I've gotten emails from people around the world. Wow. Canada, obviously America, there are many different nationalities, and so they're accessing my website, accessing the videos, then the recordings of the community, for instance, community TV. And
yes.
so it's exciting.
And so we're all over the world. But what is also interesting about this is that apparently it has meaning for people all over the world. It's not just from one country or one city. It has meaning for people all over the world. And what is the core of this meaning?
I think it has to do with it was a simpler time. And in a sense, I think people are so caught up with, I mean, certainly I now have British citizenship and American citizenship, and you look at the politics, doesn't matter which side of anything, Brexit, pro-Brexit, anti-Brexit, Republican, Democrat, everybody feels angst. And I think this is what's interesting is they felt angst as well. And this is the beginning of World War I in this era, the lead up to World War I. There's political angst. There was a lot of challenges. There was a lot of technology, a lot of excitement about the technology of the day. Airplanes were just invented. Cars were had just been invented in the late 1800s. Airplanes were invented in the beginning of 1900s. And all these expeditions were happening in that time era. And at the same time, you had this political undercurrent. And I think for them, that sense of being purpose-driven, of focusing on what I can influence, and all this other noise around me with the start of World War I, all this other stuff I can't affect. I've got to focus on what I can do. And I think they were very good at saying, where are we today and how do we move forward? And I think it's a wonderful lesson and it's a good way to think about all the noise around, and certainly in England where we have Brexit, all the noise around pro-Brexit, anti-Brexit, what's going on, what's going to happen. It's like, I can't influence any of that, but I can influence how I think about that and what I focus on and how I put one foot forward in front of the next. And that's what they were doing. Was they can't change the weather, they can't change how much food they have, they can't change all the various things. If one of the men has scurvy, they've got to just go forward. And it's just and I think it has a lot of resonance in today's society.
Absolutely. People feel this way in this country. I'm sure in many other countries, in China, probably. All over, and you said the book was bought in China, right?
Yes.
Well, somebody's getting something from it. Somebody's learning something from it. And I understand as you're describing it, things I cannot change.
Yes.
And yet, what do I do? And that's kind of what, and your special area of study is decision making.
That's right.
That's something that you yourself are very much interested in.
Yes.
And of course it leads up to survival. Well, you did tell me when we finally saw each other this morning, after it's been a year, you're working on a new book with David Hirzel.
That's
your
right.
co-author. And you want to tell us about that?
Well, I'm not ready to reveal the core theme of it. It does have a bit of an Antarctic theme to it, as well as other things. The exciting thing about the book is we now have the idea for 2 or 3 other books, and all loosely similar concepts to what we're doing here, looking at events and saying what can we learn from them for modern day decision making. And so the goal is to be here next year and launch the book on your show. And that's my goal. And David and David lives in California, in London, and our goal would be to whether David can fly over for the show, but I'll certainly be here.
Isn't that wonderful?
Be love to tell you about it.
Yes.
I think it's an exciting show, an exciting book, and it has a lot of resonance across Europe and the U.S. in looking at history and decision making and things like that. So I think it's for me it's even more exciting than this actually. This is the start, and that's the next
Yes.
edition, and it's
Well,
going beyond Antarctica.
yeah, and you're doing this at the same time that so many people in so many countries are struggling with the question of leadership and the question of where do we go from here?
Yes.
And how does technology affect and influence our lives? I mean, how many shows have I been doing about technology
Yeah.
and people's lives? It's amazing. And you're on top of it. It's really wonderful, and it's great that you're planning to come back and be on my show next year. I'll look forward to that. You know, when we talked about this, and you said that the show encouraged you to move forward.
Yes.
This TV show encouraged you to move forward, and I think this is true in life, that you get a message from some experience. You try to translate the meaning and effectiveness of the message, and then it helps you to make the decision about where we move forward. You know, so when I'm thinking, when I was a young teenager in high school, I had a teacher, a history teacher, who came up to me one day and he said, "Joan, the New York Times Youth Forum has a radio show with students from New York City. They need someone to speak about a candidate, one of the candidates for president. Why don't you take it? You're so articulate." And I was a very shy girl, so I didn't know I was articulate. But he's telling me, this teacher is telling me, and he gets me to sign up. Sure enough, I'm on, it's a radio show, and I did my homework. I went down to the headquarters of this candidate, and I said to this man, "Well, I'm Joan Goldstein, and I'm going to be on this radio show, and I need some speeches from your candidate." And he gave me a pile of speeches, and I still remember riding home on the subway and reading the speeches and reading the speeches, and I got a lot out of that. So I had a lot to share on that show. Well, apparently I made a great impression on the New York Times Youth Forum, because a few years later, when I'm now in college and I'm out there at the University of Iowa, my mother calls me up and says, "The New York Times is looking for you again."
Wow.
The Youth Forum, this time they want me on a TV show. They've now graduated to a TV show. So I'm on a very, very early TV show. And it was distracting because the cameras didn't zoom at the time. They didn't have that technology. They would roll on and make a lot of noise, make you very distracted as the cameras would zoom in at you. However, at an early time in life, I discovered that I was good on television. I didn't know this. So when sometime later, when I wrote a book, one of my books, The Politics of Offshore Oil, I was invited to be on the Today Show.
Wow.
And I had no trouble doing it. And they were amazed that, but you know, so if someone has to hold up a mirror and a reflection and says, "Hey, this is a talent that you have. This is something you have to share and give to others." And that encourages you then to move in that direction. Isn't that what happened with you?
Yes, actually, and actually what's not, and I think that's what came from the show, was I think that sense that of your enthusiasm for the book, of the topic, of the conversations that came out of it, gave me belief that it had merit. And then and it's interesting how many doors this has opened. I've met many descendants of the Antarctic explorers. I've met many modern day explorers and adventurers. I've met just historians, authors, many people involved with Antarctica, people who lecture on cruise ships. I mean, just lots of different types of people. And what's interesting is I keep meeting more people, and it's almost serendipity. Our book was endorsed by Ranulph Fiennes, who's basically the world's leading living explorer, and he's maybe 75 years old and has just done amazing exploration in warm countries and cold countries, and Antarctica and the Arctic. And he endorsed the book, and I got a chance to meet a speaker's agent, and through a friend introduced me to the speaker's agent, and I was speaking to the speaker's agent and saying, "Well, I'm doing talks at various conferences and things, and I'd like to do more public speaking." And I said, "I wrote this book about Antarctica. It's been endorsed by Ranulph Fiennes." She goes, "Oh, I'm a close personal friend of his." You think, random chance that she knows him. Then she said, and so she took me under her wing, and she's been helping organize book talks and things. And then she said, you need to get some professional photographs done. And so I go into Google and I start searching for local photographers that do portrait photographs for these sorts of business things, and find a local photographer completely by chance on Google. And I said, oh, I've written this book about Antarctica. She goes, oh, my close personal friend is Jan Meek. Jan Meek is a woman who is leading a team of women to the South Pole next year, at the end of this year. And so this, just this connection of people, everyone is like, one connection leads to another connection leads to another connection, and you're like, why is that? I don't know why that is, but it seems to, just like your thing with the New York Times, it's like it leads, these things lead, one thing leads to another, leads to another, and it opens doors, and it's exciting. And it's very exciting.
Yeah, well, I guess this is another lesson learned about life.
Yeah.
It's also, and you think you call that taking chances, right? Don't you say that's kind of taking chances, and moving ahead? That's
right. And the, so for example, I was just invited to do a keynote speech at a literary festival in the Cotswolds. And these sorts of things, it's just like, and just sort of saying, well, I'll just throw myself into it. No idea what I'm doing. It's like, just go ahead. And I think that was really what they were doing, was it's at one level, you like, I've got no idea where this is going to lead. I'm going to go down to Antarctica. We're going to do these expeditions. We've got some various sets of goals, but of course anything can get in our way, but we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens. And many of the expeditions failed to achieve their primary goal, but they achieved other goals in the process. And I think this is one of the great lessons from the book, is that putting yourself out there and doing things leads to other great opportunities, and may not always be your primary goal, but it leads to other opportunities.
Yes.
And I think that's what they found.
Right, finding your way.
Yes.
And that life isn't all written up front. You have to discover.
Yes.
You have to be an explorer yourself when
Yes.
it comes to life. Yeah, I know. I guess I could identify with it. I was always interested in hiking and backpacking, and was a member of the Appalachian Mountain Club, and I wanted to learn to be a cross-country skier. That was a goal of mine. I think I had done regular skiing, but wasn't that happy with it. And so I went up to this place up in, I think it was Vermont, for they were going to teach you. So I was taking lessons, learning how to do cross-country skiing. And this couple was in the class with me. It was a very strange thing. She was very pregnant. She was quite extended. And it was 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and they said, we're going to cross-country ski now, down to the other. They had another lodge. They had two lodges, and you could ski from one to the other. Well, you want to come with us? Well, my thought was, I don't know. It's too late in the afternoon, and I was right. Timing is very important.
Yes.
Especially, when the sun goes down and everything turns icy, and but I went with them, and it was a mistake. I could see that, and we found ourselves with no trails at all and bushwhacking all until we finally got to this place. They were already sitting down to dinner, and we come stumbling in the door. And there's a lot to be learned from this, which is you have to understand timing. You have to understand the weather. You have to know what it is that you come up against to make these decisions. So I said, okay, Joan, you survived, but don't do this again. You have lessons learned there too. Well, Brad, you're an amazing person. I'm so happy to have you come on my show again. When you sent me that email, and you said, Joan, I'm coming back to Princeton. I want to come on your show again. Oh, you made me a happy woman. I immediately picked up the phone. I called George here and said, George, I've got Brad coming back from London. I want to do a show with him. He was very happy to give me this time and this space to talk with you. Anything you want to share now? I mean, looking forward, or anything you want to share with my audience or your audience?
I'd like to tell a little Princeton story.
Okay.
The Princeton audience, which is when we did the real official book launch, which was at the Fram Museum in Oslo, in Norway. And the Fram is the ship that Amundsen took when he sailed down to Antarctica, and he was the first to get to the South Pole, trudging across the landscape to get to the South Pole. And so the Fram is a ship that's still intact, and it's in a museum. Actually, it's right next to the Kon-Tiki Museum
Oh.
in Oslo. So it's a wonderful place to visit. And we were so the launch was going to take place at Antarctic Conference held at the Fram Museum. We we're going to actually have dinner on the ship of the Fram, which was on the deck of the Fram, which was a great experience. And talking to one of the people at the conference, and there are only 60 people at the conference. And the night before the conference, we're all at this hotel, and we're having drinks at the bar, and all chatting. It's the whole conference, takes up the whole hotel. It's not a very big hotel. And I'm chatting to this man, and we start talking, and I was explaining I'm from America, but I live in London, and he's like, oh, he lives in America, he lives in New Jersey. I said, oh, where in New Jersey? He goes, well, some town in New Jersey, but he grew up in Princeton. I said, oh, I grew up in Princeton. Turned out we went to high school together. We were the same year at Princeton High School, and we went to the same university together. And we didn't know, and we hadn't seen each other in like 30 years. And just one of those small world coincidences that fits around Princeton, New Jersey. And there was so that conference took place in 2017, and we just had another same sort of conference, 2019, just last month in Ireland. And Art Gertel, who's the person, and he was at the same conference again, and we met again 2 years later. Yeah. And it's just this funny small world thing with Princeton in the middle of all that.
That's another kind of prize, small world, where you see someone. And in Newfoundland, I had a friend I went to high school with, and she was living in Newfoundland, and I was up there and I found her. It's
surprising how it's amazing how these small world experiences happen across this vast.
It's the gift.
Vast world.
It's the gift. Well, Brad Borkin, you are a wonderful adventurer yourself. You're a wonderful writer. The book is wonderful to read. And I look forward to you returning to Princeton next year and doing yet another show with yet another book. This is an adventure in and of itself. So thank you so much, Brad Borkin, for coming to Backstory with Joan Goldstein.
Well, thanks very much.